Yeah, so I think it is, when you're sitting down, you obviously will have you'll want to put together your core group of folks, whether it's a board, whether it's individuals that care about this issue in the community, to help influence what it is exactly that you want to do. And then once you've done that, it's very critical to get um, someone in, to, a pollster that will help you then take that information and hone it down into um, questions that then can be asked of the electorate, and you may want to bring in some experts that know this subject matter and have worked in these areas before to work with that pollster as well. And so I think that's a critical first step of not only bringing together the initial part of what your campaign team will be, but also making sure that they're connected with the decision makers. Now that may funnel up to just one person, or that could be a group of people. Either way works well. And then once you've done that survey and really understand, what you're looking at, and it may take a couple of surveys to do that. You may want to first just test the waters on various aspects of what you're trying to go after, and then you can find a way to hone in on a specific question, and then maybe need to go back and do that. But once you've got that nailed down, then I think that's when you then can start to move to more of a public facing, and so you may want to, you'll need to determine whether you can do this through volunteer work, or you may want to bring in some consultants who have political expertise, and again, goes back to what I'd previously answered with regards to the finances. A lot of this work can be done with volunteers, especially if you're talking about a smaller ballot measure with a smaller budget and a smaller reach. But at the same time, if you're looking at a challenging measure that might be difficult to get across the line, you'll really want to start talking to people in the community to try to bring the resources together to properly fund a campaign. And then that way you can bring in the professional help in order to make sure that you're putting a good structure in place. That also, not only can that come from individuals in the community, but it can also come from groups that also care about these issues. So whether you start first with reaching out to those groups and bringing them in, to help do that research, or do that research first and then try to attract them in. Once you've done that research, it is really important to try to get as big of a group together that of people and groups and individuals that care about this, so that you can start forming that campaign. Yeah, I mean, that's going to come down to balancing several things. So, one is going to be the strength and breadth of support of the measure. Obviously, if you have strong support, your budget may not need to be as high. Now, of course, again, as I mentioned before, these are financial measures. These are taxing measures usually, and so they tend to be that support will wane over time, just simply because it is a tax measure as you get closer to the election. But it's also the size of the electorate that you're trying to communicate with. If you have a very large district or area that you're trying to cover, like the entire state, or like the Colorado River District, did last year, you're going to have a much bigger budget in order to cover all those individuals. And then, of course, it is what finances are available to you. If you have a large district, but you don't have a lot of ability to go out and raise a lot of money, well, you're going to have a very tight budget that really just goes right after some of the key targets, that you're looking at. If you have the ability to raise more money, well, then you have a little bit more latitude to say, okay, we don't have to go to some specific targets, but we can broaden out our targeting and make it a little bit bigger. But all those things have to be balanced, one way or another, in ultimately to determine what your budget is. Right. Well, so I think of a campaign budget in two senses. One is operations, and one is communications. And you want to try to keep your operations as small as possible, and keep your communications as broad as possible, because that's what you're trying to do to win this, to win the measure, to win the campaign. You want to be talking to as many people as you can and as much as you can. However, on the operations side, you do need to have a good operating campaign, because if you don't have a good operations in place, then that's where campaigns can make mistakes. And so, those operations include, as I mentioned before, research, management, it's outreach and communication, so people who have good press experience and working with the press, but then also folks who have good networks that can help organize your outreach and making sure that you're talking to grass tops and getting them on board and making sure those grass tops are talking to other grass tops and so on. But then there's another aspect that people don't think about, and that's the legal and compliance aspect as well. Filing your measure, making sure that paperwork is all in place, making sure that you're doing your fundraising reports on time. All that is very important, and campaigns can oftentimes get in trouble if they don't have a good volunteer or a good professional in place, to be able to do that. Then on the communications side, communications is very broad. Obviously there's earned communications, again, back to using your outreach network to set up meetings where you have a speakers network that will come in and talk to various community leaders about the measure and build support that way. You also will do things through the press, whether it's op-eds, letters to the editor, got guest columns, working with reporters to make sure that they understand what the strengths of your measure. Those are all important communications from an earned media perspective, from a free perspective. But then also there's a myriad of ways to communicate to voters on the paid side, whether you're talking about internet or social media communications through digital forms, whether you're talking about mail pieces, radio ads, or even going all the way up to television. And then, of course, don't forget the all-important yard signs, because those are what